On Vikings, let's win this game.
What do Arch Manning and the Vikings' new general manager have in common? Right now, both are connected to the same question. What exactly does the future of this franchise look like? On one side, trade speculation is suddenly surrounding a Vikings starter who is supposed to be part of the team's defensive plans. Meanwhile, Sam Darnold's recent comments have reignited questions about J.J. McCarthy's future. And when you put all of those pieces together, you start to realize this offseason isn't just generating headlines. It may be shaping the next era of Vikings football far more than anyone expected. It's not often that one rumor can instantly make fans start imagining draft night 2 years in advance. But that's exactly what happened when a fascinating possibility started making the rounds involving a certain quarterback carrying one of the most famous surnames football has ever known. And no, we're not talking about a player currently wearing purple and gold. We're talking about Arch Manning. Sports Illustrated's Connor Orr recently floated an idea that feels almost impossible on the surface, but becomes a lot more interesting the deeper you look. What if Arch Manning eventually decides there are certain NFL teams he simply doesn't want to play for? Vikings fans immediately remembered what happened in 2004 when Eli Manning effectively forced his way away from the Chargers and eventually landed with the Giants. Now people are wondering if history could somehow repeat itself. The connection isn't completely random either. Arch's representation has ties to the same football circles involved in Eli's famous draft maneuver. Meanwhile, Minnesota continues to be viewed around the league as one of the premier organizations for quarterbacks. Players consistently praise the coaching staff, ownership, facilities, culture, and overall environment. We heard all offseason how attractive this destination was for veteran quarterbacks. That's not speculation. That's reality. Then comes the part that makes longtime Vikings fans smile. Arch Manning's grandfather, Archie Manning, actually finished his NFL career in Minnesota during the 1983 and 1984 seasons. A family connection exists. A storyline begins to take shape. And before long, people are picturing a draft day shocker with a Manning putting on a Vikings cap. Now let's be realistic. There are 1,000 things that would need to happen first. Arch still has college football ahead of him. Minnesota would need to be in position to make such a move. J.J. McCarthy's future remains uncertain. Kyler Murray's long-term future remains uncertain. But Todd McShay already views Manning as one of the elite quarterback prospects in what could become a loaded 2027 class. If he develops the way many expect, he'll be one of the most discussed draft prospects in years. That's why so many fans can't stop talking about it. Not because it's likely today. Because once the possibility enters the conversation, it's hard to ignore. And once Vikings fans start imagining a future built around a quarterback named Manning, that idea isn't disappearing anytime soon. Sometimes the biggest roster stories aren't about stars. They're about the players quietly fighting to keep their place while younger talent starts closing in. That's where things start getting interesting in Minnesota's safety room. Theo Jackson finds himself at the center of unexpected trade speculation after Bleacher Report suggested he could become a candidate to move elsewhere before the season begins. A year ago, that conversation would have sounded ridiculous. Today, at least people are discussing it. The reason is simple. Brian Flores loves versatile safeties. The Vikings keep investing in that position, and the room is getting crowded. Joshua Metellus remains a critical piece of the defense. Harrison Smith still hasn't officially decided whether he's returning. Jay Ward continues building momentum after finishing last season strongly. Then the Vikings used valuable draft capital to bring in rookie Jacoby Thomas, a player Flores reportedly loves because of his intelligence, physicality, communication skills, and aggressive downhill style. There are suddenly more names than obvious roles. Jackson's situation becomes even more complicated when you look at how last season unfolded. Early in the year, he was heavily involved. His snap counts were significant. His responsibilities were extensive. But as the season progressed, those numbers dropped dramatically. Inside a competitive room, trends like that rarely go unnoticed. Critics point toward coverage struggles and inconsistency in passing situations. Supporters point toward the reality that he was asked to handle a difficult role during a period when injuries forced adjustments throughout the defense. Then comes the Washington connection. Durante Jones, who previously worked with Jackson in Minnesota, now has influence with the Commanders. NFL relationships matter. Coaches trust players they've worked with. Players understand systems they've already learned. That's a big reason the trade theory gained traction. But here's where I think Vikings fans need to slow down. Flores places tremendous value on defensive flexibility and depth. Injuries happen. Rotations matter. Different opponents require different personnel packages. Having a veteran who already understands the scheme carries real value. The financial benefit of moving him isn't overwhelming either, which makes the decision even more about football than finances. That's why a trade still feels unlikely at this stage. Yet if Harrison Smith announces another season and Jacoby Thomas develops faster than expected, the math starts changing. The safety room suddenly becomes one of the most intriguing battles on the entire roster. And Theo Jackson could find himself playing for his future every time he steps onto the practice field. There's a reason certain comments hit differently when they come from someone who has actually lived through the storm. Not a former analyst, not a media personality, someone who knows exactly what it feels like to have an entire league question whether you belong. That's why Vikings fans paid attention this week when Sam Darnold opened up about the challenges young quarterbacks face in today's NFL. During an appearance on Chris Long's Greenlight podcast, Darnold talked about how quickly quarterbacks are judged now compared to previous eras. One bad stretch, one rough game, one viral clip on social media. Before long, an entire narrative forms around a player before he's had a real chance to develop. And as he spoke about the pressure created by social media, television debates, and endless online criticism, a lot of people around Minnesota immediately thought of one player, J.J. McCarthy. Darnold knows what that experience feels like better than most. He entered the league carrying enormous expectations as a top draft pick, only to spend years hearing people label him a disappointment. Eventually, he rebuilt his career, found success, and proved that early struggles don't always define a quarterback's future. That's why his comments resonated so strongly, because whether he intended it or not, they mirrored what many believe McCarthy is dealing with right now. After being selected 10th overall in the 2024 draft, McCarthy was viewed as the future of the franchise. Kevin O'Connell and the organization were prepared to be patient with his development. Then injuries changed the timeline. Valuable reps disappeared. Momentum stalled. And while flashes of talent remained, the process became far less straightforward than anyone expected. Then came the move that shifted the entire conversation. The Vikings brought in Kyler Murray. Now the discussion wasn't just about developing a young quarterback anymore. It became about competition, urgency, and winning now. Reports from OTAs suggest Murray has looked significantly ahead at this stage, which isn't shocking considering his experience and track record in the league. But it does create an uncomfortable reality for a player who arrived in Minnesota expecting to eventually become the face of the franchise. That's why a recent report from former NFL insider Jason LaCanfora grabbed so much attention. According to LaCanfora, an NFL general manager suggested that McCarthy may have been unhappy since Murray arrived and could potentially want a fresh start elsewhere. Now, it's important to remember that this remains speculation, not confirmation. McCarthy himself has not publicly said any of that, but the fact that these conversations are happening at all shows just how much uncertainty now surrounds the most important position in the organization. And that's where Darnold's comments feel even more relevant, because before his career turnaround, he was a young quarterback battling expectations, criticism, and doubts about his future. The question now is whether McCarthy is simply experiencing the same growing pains that so many quarterbacks face on their path to success, or whether the Vikings are watching a very different story begin to unfold inside their quarterback room. Long after players retire and draft classes fade into history, one thing usually determines whether a franchise stays successful: leadership, structure, alignment. That's why the Vikings' decision to hire Nolan Teasley as general manager could become one of the defining moments of this entire decade. At first glance, the move feels exciting. Teasley arrives with a strong reputation from Seattle. Kevin O'Connell continues establishing himself as one of the league's most respected head coaches. Rob Brzezinski remains one of football's premier salary cap minds. Put those three together and it's easy to see why ownership feels optimistic. But beneath the excitement sits a fascinating question. How exactly will power be shared? Many longtime Vikings fans remember the old triangle of authority structure from years ago. Back then, decision-making responsibilities were spread among multiple leaders. Sometimes it worked beautifully, other times tensions emerged. Now Minnesota appears ready to revisit a similar model. Ownership has openly emphasized collaboration between Teasley, O'Connell, and Brzezinski. In theory, that's powerful, and it's easy to understand why ownership believes in it. You combine scouting expertise, coaching vision, and financial strategy. You get different perspectives attacking the same problems. That's the upside. The risk is equally obvious. What happens when opinions differ? Who gets final say during difficult moments? What happens after a losing streak? What happens when a major contract decision divides the room? Those questions matter because the most successful NFL organizations usually have clarity when difficult decisions arrive. Reports suggest Teasley may fit naturally within Minnesota's culture because of his traditional football background. That could help avoid some of the friction that reportedly existed during previous front office dynamics. O'Connell's influence has steadily grown since arriving in Minnesota. Brzezinski has decades of institutional knowledge. Teasley now enters that environment carrying expectations of his own. The encouraging part is that all three appear eager to work together from the start. The concerning part is that nobody truly knows how these partnerships handle adversity until adversity arrives. That's what makes this story so important. It isn't about one game. It isn't about one season. It's about the framework that could influence every draft pick, every contract, every trade, and every major decision moving forward. If this trio clicks, Minnesota could position itself among the league's most stable organizations. If communication ever breaks down, the consequences could ripple throughout the entire franchise. And that's why this hire may ultimately prove bigger than any roster move we've discussed today. That's what makes this offseason feel so fascinating. Every storyline seems connected to something bigger than itself. A possible future quarterback, a roster battle that could reshape an entire position group, questions surrounding development and patience, uncertainty around the future of a former first-round pick, and a leadership structure that may determine where this franchise goes next. Vikings Nation has seen hope before. We've seen heartbreak before too. But that's why we keep showing up. That's why we stay invested. Let me know which story has you thinking the most right now. And as always, thank you for being part of this community. No matter what comes next, we'll be here following every twist together. Stay tuned. Skol Vikings. Let's go.